The reason that we are learning how to factor is so that we can actually solve a quadratic equation. So let's start by talking about exactly the standard form of a quadratic equation. Make sure you know this as form, excuse me. Well, come on. Okay, so we will use this over and over and over and over all semester long, and every time I say to you, what's the standard form of a quadratic equation, you need to say ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And what makes it a quadratic equation is this exponent being a 2, as opposed to, say, a linear equation, which would be ax plus by equals c. Don't really worry about that. We will talk about that in unit number 5. But this is a standard form of a quadratic equation because it has a 2 for the exponent is what makes it a quadratic equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So if I asked you, if I had x times y and it equaled 0, what would that tell you about x or about y? So shut this off for just a second. Think about what that tells you about what x has to be, or what about y has to be, or maybe it's both of them. But think about it for just a second, and then come back, and we'll go on. So, if these are being multiplied together, and their product, the answer, the name of the product, the name of the answer is product when we're multiplied. When that answer is 0, it means either x has to be 0 or y has to be 0. So we have something called the zero factor property. And it's basically just based on this idea that says if I can get two factors and they're equal to 0, then I can set each factor equal to 0 and I can solve for it. So that's all we're doing when we factor, okay? Just so we can get the two factors and set them each equal to 0. So our first example is actually already in factored form for us. Okay? So these are already factors. Half the work's already done. All I need to do is go, oh my goodness, this is in factored form. So I will set each factor equal to 0 and then solve each of these equations separately. So 8a, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides and then divide by 8. And I get a equals negative 3/8. This side, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And then I'm going to divide by 2. And so then I get a equals negative 3/8. Or, that's what the comma means, negative 1/2. Please write your answer just like this. Whenever it's an equation, your answer must always be a equals this or that if there's more than one. And write it like this. Do not write it a equals negative 3/8, a equals negative 1/2. Please do not do that. Please do it as I've done here. Okay? So let's do another example or two. But remember, so let me find, so if I have 5z squared minus 25z, oh, excuse me, just a moment, whoops, not that. I wanted to okay, how do I erase them? All right, I wanted to show it to you in a different way. Oops, go back to this. Sometimes. Okay, equals 25z. Now, this is not in standard form. Remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Well, this one doesn't equal 0, so I can't start solving this equation until I have it in standard form. Well, the way to get this in standard form is to move this guy over here, and then it'll all be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 25z from both sides, so I get 5z squared minus 25z equals 0. Now it's in standard form. So how I want to think about this is just like this, what we've been doing all along. Look at all my rules. So I'm thinking about it without the 0. And then factor it just like we've learned how to do in our factoring rules. And then just remember that the 0 is there, and we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to look at this, just this part, and think about rule number 1. Is there a greatest common factor? Well, yep, I can get a 5 and I can get a z out. That leaves me with z minus 5 equals 0. Now these are, it's fully factored. These are 2 factors. And so I'll set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So when I divide this by 5, if I do it to one side, then I have to do it to the other. And so I get z equals 0. That is a fine answer. Make sure it's not always the answer. Just because it's called the 0 factor property doesn't mean we always get a 0. But sometimes we do, and that is an okay answer. And then this, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I get z equals 0 or 5. Let's just check this one. I am going to rewrite the problem again, so just so we can see it. 5z squared equals 25z. So I'm going to check 0 first. So 5 times 0 squared equals 25 times 0. Well, 0 squared is 0, and 5 times 0 is 0. And 25 times 0 is 0. And does 0 equal 0? Well, it does. That's true. That means that 0 is a true answer. Let's try again and do it with, oops, I don't want to do it there. Okay, so 5 times 5 squared equals 25 times 5. So I just put in what the answer is into wherever there is a z. So 5 squared is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. And 5 times 25 is 125. And 125 equals 125 means that both this answer and this answer are true. And so those are our final answers. Okay? I'm going to do other examples that pertain to the other things, rules that we learn. So do those when you get to those rules.